The reception hall lights were still glaring in my eyes when Mario told me I wouldn't be welcome at his wedding unless I paid for it. My own son, the boy I'd raised alone after his father died, now staring at me with cold eyes that belonged to a stranger. "Mom, I need to be honest. We can't afford the wedding Ginger deserves," he said, his voice unnervingly businesslike. "Either you cover the costs, or we'd prefer you don't attend at all." It would be too awkward explaining why my mother couldn't contribute to the most important day of my life. Just like that. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. Issued an ultimatum about the most significant family event in years. What Mario didn't know was that I had already been quietly monitoring the venue situation. Willowbrook Estate, the lakeside mansion his fiancée had been posting about for months on her social media, had recently gone up for sale due to the owner's financial troubles. While my son was demanding I pay $60,000 for a wedding I might not even attend, I'd already been in talks with my financial advisor about liquidating some investments for a much bigger purpose. 47 years of bedtime stories, college tuition, payments and standing ovations at school, plays reduced to a financial transaction. That was the moment I realized my son had become someone I no longer recognized. And perhaps the most painful truth, he had never really seen me at all. I'm Antonia Mills, 68 years old with arthritic hands that still somehow managed to sign the purchase agreement for Willowbrook Estate 3 days after my son's ultimatum. The realtor seemed surprised that a retired school principal could afford such a property, but she didn't know about the decades of careful investing, the rental properties I maintained on weekends while raising a child alone, or my late husband's life insurance policy that I'd never touched, determined to build security through my own efforts instead. I was 40 when Mario was born, my miracle baby after years of fertility treatments. James and I had almost given up hope when those 2 blue lines appeared on the test. I still remember holding him for the first time, this wrinkled, perfect human with a shock of black hair and eyes that seemed impossibly wise. "He knows you're his mama," the nurse had said, and in that moment, I made a silent promise that I would give him everything he needed to thrive: love, stability, opportunity. When Mario was 10, James died unexpectedly of a heart attack while on a business trip. The funeral was a blur of black clothing and casseroles, but I remember Mario's small hand in mine, squeezing 3 times, our secret code for "I love you." That night, as I tucked him into bed, his eyes wide with fear about our uncertain future, I made another promise. Nothing will change. I'll make sure we're okay. And I did. I took on extra tutoring jobs after my full days as a teacher, working my way up to department head and eventually principal. I forewent new clothes and vacations to maintain our comfortable home in Riverside Heights, ensuring Mario could stay in the same school with his friends. I learned to fix leaky faucets, mow the lawn, and change the oil in our aging Honda, tasks James had always handled. "Why can't I have the new PlayStation like Devin?" Mario would ask, his teenage face a mask of practiced disappointment. I'd smile and tell him we were saving for something more important, his college fund. That became our pattern. I would find a way, always, to give Mario what he needed and, whenever possible, what he wanted too. I remember the day Mario was accepted to Westridge University. He burst into the kitchen waving the acceptance letter, his face flushed with excitement. "Mom, I got in!" he shouted, wrapping his lanky arms around me in a rare teenage display of affection. I held him tight, my heart swelling with pride even as my mind calculated the astronomical tuition. Private university meant liquidating one of my rental properties, but seeing the joy on his face, I knew it was worth it. "How are we going to afford this?" he asked later that night, a moment of reality breaking through his excitement. "Don't worry about that," I told him, squeezing his shoulder the way I had since he was small. I've been planning for your education since before you were born. It wasn't entirely true. I'd been saving, yes, but nowhere near enough. What I didn't tell him was that I would be taking out a second mortgage on our home, renting out the basement as an apartment, and working through my summers that had previously been dedicated to visiting my aging mother in Florida. But watching him plan his future that night, talking excitedly about the engineering program, I regretted nothing. The college years passed in a blur of tuition payments, care packages, and weekend visits whenever I could manage the 6-hour drive. While other parents my age were downsizing and starting travel funds, I was budgeting for textbooks and emergency apartment repairs when Mario's roommate accidentally flooded their bathroom. Frances Blackwood, my oldest friend and fellow teacher, noticed the dark circles under my eyes one day and asked if everything was all right. "Just the usual end-of-semester chaos," I said with a weak smile, not mentioning the 3 hours of sleep I'd gotten after staying up to finalize grades before driving to help Mario move into his summer internship housing. "Antonia," she said, her voice kind but concerned. "You've been just tired for 20 years. At some point, you need to think about yourself, too." I brushed off her concern. "Mario graduates next year, then I'll slow down." But life rarely goes according to plan. After graduation, Mario moved to Chicago for a marketing position that paid barely enough to cover his share of rent in a cramped apartment with 2 roommates. "Mom, I hate to ask, but I'm coming up short on rent this month." Became a regular call, and each time I would transfer the money, tightening my own budget a little more, delaying my roof repairs, putting off the knee surgery my doctor had been recommending for years. "You need to start saying no, Tony," Frances told me over coffee one Sunday. "He's an adult now. He needs to figure things out on his own." "It's just until he gets established," I insisted. "Marketing is competitive for entry-level positions." Frances gave me a look I'd come to know well. Equal parts concern and exasperation. "You've been saying that for 2 years now. When does it end?" The truth was, I didn't have an answer for Frances then. I didn't know how to stop being the person who solved all of Mario's problems. It had been my identity for so long that I wasn't sure who I would be without it. The quiet school principal by day, the ever-supportive mother at all hours, these roles had defined me for decades. Before Mario, before James, I had been someone else entirely. Growing up in a small coastal town in Maine, I was Antonia Reynolds, the ambitious daughter of a fisherman and a seamstress. My parents had emigrated from Portugal in their 20s, carrying little more than hope and a work ethic that never dimmed. They spoke broken English at home, and I became their translator by age 7, navigating adult conversations about bills, doctor's appointments, and parent-teacher conferences. "You smart girl, Antonia," my father would say in his thick accent, patting my head after I helped him understand the insurance paperwork for his small fishing boat. "You go to college, yes? Be important, lady." They couldn't help me with homework, but they made sure I had a desk in my tiny bedroom, a cup always filled with sharpened pencils, and uninterrupted time to study while my friends were asked to help. In family businesses, my mother would silently leave cups of tea beside me as I worked late into the night, her way of supporting dreams she couldn't articulate in English. I was the first in my family to finish high school, let alone attend college. The day I received my acceptance letter to the state university with a partial scholarship, my father closed his fishing operation for the day, something he'd never done except during dangerous storms, and took the whole family out for dinner, at the only restaurant in town that wasn't a diner. "To Antonia," he said, raising his glass of wine, his eyes shining with unshed tears. "You make Reynolds' name proud." That night, as my parents spoke rapidly in Portuguese in the kitchen, thinking I couldn't hear, my mother worried about the portion of tuition the scholarship wouldn't cover. My father's response has stayed with me all these years. "We sell boat if we must. Our daughter not stay small like us." I didn't let them sell the boat. Instead, I worked 3 part-time jobs throughout college, studying on bus rides between shifts, graduating with honors despite the exhaustion. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. My education degree wasn't as prestigious as the law career my father had imagined for me, but when I explained that as a teacher, I could help other children of immigrants find their paths, he nodded in understanding. "You build bridges," he said simply. "This good work." I was building my career as a dedicated young teacher when I met James Mills at a faculty mixer. He was a visiting professor of economics, with kind eyes and a quiet confidence that complemented my more direct approach. Our courtship was brief but certain. Two people who recognized in each other a shared seriousness about life and its responsibilities. We married when I was 28, expecting to start a family right away. But month after month, year after year, disappointment followed. Tests revealed issues on both sides, my endometriosis, his low sperm count. We entered the exhausting cycle of fertility treatments, hormone injections, scheduled intimacy, and the monthly grief when nothing worked. "Perhaps we should consider adoption," James suggested gently after our third failed IVF attempt, finding me crying in our bathroom. "One more try," I pleaded. "I feel it could work this time." It didn't, nor did the next 3 attempts. By the time I turned 38, we had depleted our savings and much of our emotional reserves. We began the adoption process, compiling a profile that presented us as the stable, loving parents we desperately wanted to be. Then, against all medical predictions, at 39, I discovered I was pregnant naturally. The pregnancy was classified high risk due to my age and history, and I spent the final 2 months on bed rest, grading papers from my bedroom while James brought me meals and prenatal vitamins with the same tender care he'd shown throughout our marriage. When Mario James Mills arrived, screaming his displeasure at the bright hospital lights, something fierce and primal awakened in me. This child, this miracle, would have everything I could possibly provide. The determination that had carried me from my parents' modest home to a college degree, that had sustained me through years of fertility struggles, now focused entirely on giving Mario the most secure, opportunity-filled life possible. James understood my intensity. "You love completely, Antonia," he would say, watching me organize Mario's educational toys by developmental stage when he was still an infant. "It's what drew me to you. Just remember to save some of that ferocious love for yourself too." But after James died, saving anything for myself seemed indulgent, unnecessary. There was only Mario and what he needed, a mother who could be both parents, a home that didn't feel broken despite its missing piece, a future uncompromised by loss. Poured everything into maintaining normalcy, into compensating for the absence of his father. When Mario needed help with science projects, I studied physics textbooks late into the night so I could explain concepts James would have understood intuitively. When he joined Little League, I attended every game despite knowing little about baseball, quietly researching rules and terminology so I could discuss his performance knowledgeably. "You don't have to do everything, you know," my sister-in-law Penelope told me after watching me rush from a parent-teacher conference to Mario's band performance, still in my work clothes, carrying a homemade dinner in Tupperware containers, so we wouldn't have to eat fast food. "James wouldn't expect you to be superhuman." "I'm not trying to be superhuman," I replied, unpacking the still warm pasta I'd prepared during my lunch break. "I'm just trying to make sure Mario doesn't miss out on anything because his father is gone." What I couldn't admit then, what I barely acknowledged to myself, was that I feared Mario would leave me too, in his own way. If I wasn't enough, if I couldn't provide enough, be enough, perhaps he would emotionally detach, become distant, find other people to fill the parental role I was trying so desperately to fulfill completely. So I worked harder, saved more carefully, anticipated needs before Mario could even articulate them. I became less Antonia and more Mario's mom, a role I performed with such thoroughness that even my closest friends began to comment on it. "When was the last time you did something just for yourself?" Frances asked during a rare evening out. While Mario was at a high school overnight trip. Something that had nothing to do with school or Mario? I stared at her blankly, unable to recall a single example. The question itself seemed almost incomprehensible, like asking when I'd last grown a third arm or visited Jupiter. Doing things solely for myself had become such a foreign concept that I couldn't even formulate a plausible lie. Frances sighed, reading my expression accurately. "That's what I thought. You're disappearing, Tony, and you don't even realize it." Despite Frances's concerns, the pattern established during Mario's childhood intensified as he entered adulthood. Our relationship, once characterized by bedtime stories and soccer game sideline cheers, evolved into something more financially transactional, though I didn't recognize it at the time. Each call for rent assistance or help with an unexpected car repair seemed like a natural extension of motherhood, just another way to support my son as he found his footing in the world. "It's an investment in his future," I would tell Frances whenever she raised concerns. "Once he's established in his career, things will balance out." Mario's early career in Chicago was a series of lateral moves between marketing firms, each promising better opportunities that never quite materialized. I didn't question his frequent job changes or his explanations about toxic work environments and limited growth potential. Instead, I sent care packages with homemade cookies and gift cards to grocery stores, knowing his entry-level salary barely covered essentials. When he called to announce he'd been offered a position at Horizon Marketing in Minneapolis, a real step-up mom with actual career advancement, I immediately offered to help with moving expenses. "Thanks, Mom. I knew I could count on you," he said, relief evident in his voice. "This is the fresh start I need." The move to Minneapolis marked a turning point for Mario. The new position came with a substantial salary increase, and for the first time since college, he didn't need my financial support for several months. Our weekly calls shifted from discussions of his budget shortfalls to excited descriptions of client meetings and office politics. "I'm finally getting to use my creative skills," he told me during one Sunday call. "My team lead says I have natural talent for conceptual marketing." His voice had a confidence I hadn't heard before, and I felt a surge of maternal pride. This was what all those years of sacrifice had been for, seeing my son thrive, watching him build the life he deserved. During his second year in Minneapolis, our dynamic shifted again when Mario met Ginger Thompson at a charity gala hosted by his firm. From the beginning, Ginger occupied a disproportionate amount of our conversation time. "Ginger thinks I should ask for a promotion," he would say, or "Ginger says my apartment doesn't reflect my professional status." I learned that Ginger was the daughter of Cole Thompson, whose construction company had built half the luxury developments in the Minneapolis suburbs. She worked as the company's marketing director, a position Mario described as mostly nepotism, but she's actually really good at it. The first time Mario brought Ginger to visit me in Riverside Heights, I prepared for days, deep cleaning the house, planning meals that accommodated the dietary preferences Mario had mentioned, even repainting the guest bedroom. I wanted everything to be perfect, to make a good impression on this woman who clearly meant so much to my son. Ginger arrived wearing designer clothes that probably cost more than my monthly mortgage payment, her blonde hair styled in an elegant bob, diamond studs glittering in her ears. She greeted me with a practiced smile and air kisses beside each cheek. "It's so lovely to finally meet you," she said, handing me a bottle of wine that I later discovered cost over $100. "Mario has told me so much about you in this charming little town." Throughout the weekend, Ginger maintained a polite interest in my home and life, but I couldn't miss the way her eyes cataloged everything: the dated kitchen cabinets, the comfortable but worn furniture, the family photos in simple frames. She was assessing, categorizing, determining my place in some social hierarchy I had never particularly cared about. More concerning was the way Mario suddenly seemed to see my home through her eyes. He had grown up in this house, had never before commented on its modest character, but now he made small suggestions about updating and modernizing. "Mom, have you ever thought about renovating the kitchen?" he asked while Ginger was taking a phone call on the porch. "Stainless appliances would really transform the space." "The appliances all work perfectly fine," I replied, surprised by the suggestion. "And I'm saving for retirement, not granite countertops." He looked momentarily embarrassed, then shrugged. "Just a thought. Ginger's dad could probably get you a deal through his contractor connections." That evening, as we sat on the back patio enjoying dessert, Ginger steered the conversation toward family traditions and expectations. "In my family," she said, swirling her wine glass, "weddings are major events. My sister's wedding was at the Minneapolis Botanical Gardens, absolutely stunning. 300 guests, formal dinner, live orchestra." "That sounds lovely," I responded neutrally, noticing how Mario was watching Ginger with admiration. "Every family has their own priorities for such occasions." "Absolutely," she agreed with a smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. "Though I think certain traditions are universal. The father walking the bride down the aisle, mother-son dance, parents hosting to demonstrate their blessing of the union." I nodded, choosing not to mention that in my Portuguese family's traditions, weddings had been simpler affairs focused more on community celebration than lavish displays. My own wedding to James had been modest, a church ceremony followed by a reception in his parents' large backyard, with homemade food and a cousin's band providing music. Later that night, after Ginger had gone to bed, Mario lingered in the kitchen as I washed the last dishes. "What do you think of her?" he asked, trying to sound casual but watching my face intently. "She seems very accomplished," I said carefully, "and she clearly cares about you." "But?" he prompted, sensing my reservation. I dried my hands on a dish towel, choosing my words with care. "Not a but, really. Just an observation that you two come from different backgrounds with different expectations. That's neither good nor bad. Just something to navigate together." Mario's expression tightened slightly. "Her background has opened doors for me, Mom. Cole introduced me to the VP at my company, and I'm being considered for a management position now." "That's wonderful," I said sincerely. "I just want to make sure you're building a life that feels authentic to you, not one that's expected of you." He laughed, but it sounded forced. "Trust me, I'm very happy to leave behind the budgeting stress of my early 20s. Ginger understands ambition. She's helping me reach my potential." The engagement came 6 months later, announced via a professional photograph posted on social media before Mario even called me. The image showed Ginger's manicured hand sporting a diamond ring that must have cost several months of Mario's salary, with a Minneapolis skyline sunset in the background. When he finally called the next day, his excitement was palpable. "She said, 'Yes, Mom. We're thinking about a spring wedding at Willowbrook Estate. Ginger says it's the premier venue in the area.'" "That's wonderful news, sweetheart," I said, ignoring the sting of learning about my son's engagement alongside his. Hundreds of social media connections. "I'm so happy for you both." Ginger's already started planning. Her mom has connections with all the best vendors, and her dad's offering us a condo in one of his new developments as a wedding gift. Can you believe it? "That's very generous," I managed, wondering if Mario realized he was stepping into a life where he would be permanently indebted, financially and otherwise, to his in-laws. "We should talk about the wedding budget soon," he continued, his voice taking on a more businesslike tone. "Ginger's parents will handle most things, of course, but there are traditionally certain expenses the mother of the groom covers." That was the first hint of the expectations that would eventually lead to our confrontation in the reception hall of the country club, where Mario had insisted we meet to discuss wedding plans. The moment when my son would make it clear that my role as his mother had been reduced to a financial transaction, with my presence at his wedding contingent on my willingness to pay. The months between Mario's engagement and our fateful meeting at Lakeside Country Club revealed a steadily growing pattern of imbalance in our relationship. Each interaction seemed to push me further from the role of mother and closer to that of a potential financial contributor to the grand vision Ginger and her family had for the wedding. It began with casual mentions during our weekly phone calls. Ginger had found the perfect florist, but their packages started at $5,000. The photographer they wanted was already booking 2 years out, but might make an exception for a premium fee. The guest list had grown to 250 people because connections are everything in Cole's business. "How are you planning to manage all these expenses?" I asked Mario during one such call, genuine concern in my voice. "We're figuring it out," he replied vaguely. "Ginger's parents are covering a lot, and we have some savings. Plus, it's an investment in our future. The right people need to be there, impressed by every detail." I didn't point out that these right people were strangers to me, or that an elaborate display seemed unlikely to determine the actual success of their marriage. Instead, I listened and offered support where I could, sending small checks marked for wedding expenses from my teacher's pension that Mario accepted without much acknowledgement. The dynamic shifted more dramatically when Mario and Ginger created a wedding planning group text that included me, Ginger's parents Cole and Harriet Thompson, and the wedding planner they'd hired, a woman named Penelope, whose services alone cost more than my annual property taxes. Within this digital forum, my irrelevance became increasingly apparent. When I suggested a family friend who made beautiful wedding cakes at reasonable prices, Ginger responded, "Thanks for the thought, Antonia, but we've already booked Elegance Patisserie. They've done desserts for the governor's mansion." When I asked about the rehearsal dinner, traditionally hosted by the groom's family, Cole Thompson quickly interjected, "We've secured a private room at Maison d'Or. Our family has a standing relationship with the chef. We'll handle this to ensure it coordinates with the overall wedding weekend experience." Each decision was presented as already finalized, each suggestion of mine politely acknowledged, then swiftly dismissed. Worse, Mario never once intervened or advocated for my inclusion. He had become an eager participant in my systematic exclusion. Francis noticed the toll this was taking during our monthly book club meeting, which I'd nearly skipped to review wedding budget spreadsheets Mario had finally sent. Spreadsheets that included a highlighted section labeled, "Mother of Groom Expected. Contributions." "You're not yourself, Tony," Francis said, finding me alone in the kitchen during a refreshment break. "You've been quiet all evening." I forced a smile. "Just wedding stress. So many details." Francis narrowed her eyes. "Funny, I thought the bride and groom were supposed to be the stressed ones, not the mother being deliberately sidelined." My surprise must have shown on my face because Francis continued more gently. "Mario called me last week, asking if I thought you could manage a $30,000 contribution to the wedding. He mentioned your retirement accounts." The room seemed to tilt slightly. "He what?" "I told him it was inappropriate to discuss your finances with me, and even more inappropriate to be speculating about your retirement savings." Francis put a hand on my arm. "Tony, what's happening here? This isn't the boy you raised." I couldn't answer her then, couldn't articulate how completely the ground had shifted beneath my relationship with my son. The next day, however, I received a text from Mario. "Mom, we need to discuss the wedding finances in person. Lunch at Lakeside Country Club, Thursday at 1. Important we get this figured out." The venue itself was a statement, an exclusive club where the Thompsons were members, where I would be entering as an outsider on Mario's guest pass. I wore my best outfit, a navy blue dress I'd purchased for a school fundraiser years ago, and arrived 15 minutes early to compose myself. Mario and Ginger were already there, heads bent together over a tablet displaying what appeared to be floor plans. They didn't see me at first, and I observed them unnoticed. My son in an expensive suit I didn't recognize, Ginger's hand possessively on his arm, both of them looking like they belonged in this world of mahogany paneling and hushed luxury. "Mom!" Mario finally noticed me, standing to offer a brief hug that felt more like a business greeting than a son embracing his mother. "You remember Ginger, of course." "Antonia, so lovely to see you again," Ginger said, extending her hand rather than rising for a proper greeting. "Thanks for making time for this important discussion." The lunch that followed was excruciating. After brief small talk about the weather and my drive to the club, Mario pulled out a leather portfolio containing printouts of spreadsheets, vendor contracts, and venue details. "So here's where we are," he began, his tone matching the businesslike demeanor he'd adopted since arriving in Minneapolis. "The total wedding budget is approximately $175,000. The Thompsons are covering about 70%, including the venue deposit, catering, and entertainment." I nearly choked on my water. $175,000? Mario? "That's industry standard for an event of this caliber," Ginger interjected smoothly. "Actually, quite reasonable considering the guest list and location." Mario nodded in agreement before continuing. "We've allocated the remaining 30% to be covered by you, Mom. That comes to about $52,500. The number hung in the air between us, its weight almost physical. I set down my fork carefully, no longer interested in the overpriced salad I'd been picking at. "Mario, you know that's not possible. I'm living on a principal's pension and some modest investments. That's more than half my annual income." "We thought you might tap into your retirement accounts," Ginger suggested, as if recommending I pick up milk at the grocery store. "My financial advisor says the early withdrawal penalties can be offset by—" "I'm not withdrawing from my retirement," I interrupted, a firmness in my voice that seemed to surprise both of them. "Those funds are carefully managed to ensure I don't become a burden to Mario in my later years." Mario at least had the grace to look momentarily uncomfortable before rallying. "Mom, this is a standard arrangement. The mother of the groom traditionally handles certain aspects, rehearsal dinner, your outfit, transportation, and contributes to the overall costs. Traditional contributions," I responded carefully, "are relative to one's means. Your grandmother helped with my wedding by making my dress and cooking for 50 guests. I'm happy to contribute what I can, but not at the expense of my financial security." Ginger's expression cooled noticeably. "We understand that finances can be constraining for some people. Perhaps we could discuss a payment plan." Before I could respond to this condescension, Mario reached across the table to take my hand in what appeared to be a conciliatory gesture. His next words, however, shattered any illusion of compromise. "Mom, Ginger, and I have discussed this at length. The wedding needs to meet certain standards for her family's social position and my professional networking. If you can't contribute financially in a meaningful way, we think it would be best if you didn't attend at all. It would be awkward explaining why my mother wouldn't support my marriage." The reception hall lights were still glaring in my eyes as the full impact of his words registered. My son was issuing an ultimatum, pay up or stay away, treating my presence at his wedding as a transaction rather than a deeply meaningful family moment. "Let me be clear," I said, my voice surprisingly steady despite the hurricane of emotions raging inside me. "You're saying that unless I empty my retirement accounts to fund your extravagant wedding, I'm not welcome to attend?" "Don't frame it like that," Mario said, a flash of the boy I raised briefly visible in his discomfort. "We're just being practical about expectations. And my only value in this situation is financial," I finished for him. "Not as your mother, not as family, but as a checkbook." "That's unfair," Ginger interjected. "We're simply ensuring the wedding reflects our status appropriately." I looked at her, then back at my son, suddenly seeing with painful clarity what our relationship had become. "I think I understand perfectly now." Thank you for making this so transparent. I gathered my purse and stood, no longer interested in finishing this charade of a lunch. I'll let you know my decision soon. As I walked away, I heard Ginger whisper to Mario, "That went better than expected. I think she'll come around." They had no idea that their ultimatum had already crystallized a decision in my mind, one that neither of them could possibly anticipate. The drive home from Lakeside Country Club took 40 minutes, but it felt like hours as my mind replayed Mario's ultimatum in an endless loop. Rain began to fall, matching my mood as I navigated the familiar streets of my neighborhood that suddenly seemed different, as if the conversation had altered not just my relationship with my son, but the very landscape of my life. I pulled into my driveway and sat with the engine off, watching raindrops race down the windshield. The house before me, the home where I'd raised Mario, where we'd built thousands of memories, now felt like a monument to a relationship that perhaps had never been what I thought it was. Instead of going inside, I made an impulsive decision and drove to Frances's house. She answered the door in gardening clothes, soil still on her knees. But one look at my face and she ushered me inside without questions. "He said what?" she demanded after I recounted the lunch meeting, her voice rising with indignation. "After everything you've sacrificed for that boy?" "It wasn't just Mario," I said wearily, accepting the strong tea she pressed into my hands. Ginger was there, orchestrating the whole thing. I hardly recognized my own son. Frances sat beside me on her floral couch, the same one where we'd spent countless evenings grading papers and sharing teaching strategies during our years as colleagues. "Tony, this isn't just about money. This is about values. And clearly, yours and Mario's have diverged significantly." "I keep wondering where I went wrong," I admitted, the question that had been haunting me since I left the country club. "Did I spoil him? Did I enable this entitlement?" "You loved him," Frances said firmly. "Perhaps too sacrificially, but with pure intentions. The real question is what you're going to do now." I stared into my tea, watching the leaves swirl at the bottom. "I don't know. If I refuse to pay, I miss my only child's wedding. If I agree, I compromise my financial security and essentially validate that my worth is purely monetary." Frances was quiet for a long moment, then said something that would alter the course of everything that followed. "There's another option, you know. You're thinking inside their framework. Pay or don't pay, attend or don't attend. What if you change the framework entirely?" "What do you mean?" "I mean," she said, a spark of mischief lighting her eyes, "what if you took control of the situation in a way they'd never expect? You've always played by the rules, Tony. Maybe it's time to rewrite them." That night, I couldn't sleep. Frances's words echoed in my mind, colliding with memories of raising Mario, of the sacrifices that had seemed so worth it, of the son who once squeezed my hand 3 times to say, "I love you," and who now measured that love in dollar signs. At 3 in the morning, I got up and went to my small home office. I unlocked the bottom drawer of my filing cabinet and pulled out a folder labeled Real Estate Investments. Inside were documents I hadn't reviewed in years, the details of 2 rental properties I'd maintained since Mario was young, the life insurance policy from James that I'd invested rather than spent, and financial statements showing the growth of careful investments made over decades of frugal living. Contrary to what Mario and Ginger assumed, I wasn't struggling financially. I lived modestly by choice, not necessity. The principal's salary I'd earned for 15 years had been invested wisely with the help of Tony Ramirez, a financial advisor whose own mother had been one of my first students when I began teaching. Tony had guided me toward conservative but steady investments, building a portfolio that had weathered economic downturns and grown substantially over time. I spread the documents across my desk, making calculations until dawn painted my window with pale light. By breakfast, I had made my decision. I called Tony as soon as his office opened. "I need to liquidate some investments," I told him. and I'd like to explore purchasing a commercial property. That's a significant shift from your usual strategy, Tony responded, surprise evident in his voice. What type of commercial property are we talking about? An event venue, I said, the words feeling strange but right on my tongue. Specifically, Willowbrook Estate. After a pause, Tony asked carefully, "Isn't that where Mario is planning to hold his wedding?" "Yes," I confirmed. "It's recently come up for sale. The current owner is facing bankruptcy and needs to sell quickly." "Antonia," Tony said, using my full name as he did when being especially serious, "this is an entirely different class of investment than your rental properties. We're talking about a significant portion of your portfolio, even with your excellent financial position. I need to be sure you've thought this through." "I have," I assured him, with more confidence than I'd felt about any decision in years. "Can you arrange a meeting with the owner and their representative?" 3 days later, I sat in the ornate library of Willowbrook Estate, facing Veronica Livingston, the elegant but clearly distressed owner, and her real estate agent. The mansion had been in the Livingston family for generations, serving as their private residence until economic necessity had driven them to convert it into an event venue 15 years earlier. "The property has excellent revenue potential," the agent was explaining, sliding glossy brochures across the polished table, "but requires certain operational investments to maximize profitability." "I understand," I said, glancing around at the antique furnishings and crystal chandeliers. "I'm less interested in the business model you've been using and more interested in the property itself. I have some different ideas about its future operations." Within a week of my initial meeting at Willowbrook Estate, I found myself immersed in a world of real estate transactions, business licenses, and venue management logistics. The purchase was moving forward with surprising speed, facilitated by Veronica Livingston's urgent need to sell and my ability to make a substantial cash down payment, thanks to liquidating one of my long-held investment accounts. Tony advised, "Caution at every step," bringing in a commercial property inspector, reviewing years of financial statements from the venue's operations, and insisting on contingency clauses in the purchase agreement. But beneath his professional thoroughness, I sensed both concern and curiosity about my motivations. "Antonia," he said during one of our meetings, after the lawyer had left us alone in his conference room, "I've been your financial advisor for almost 20 years. This is uncharacteristically impulsive for you." I smiled, appreciating his tactful approach. "It only seems impulsive, Tony. In reality, it's the culmination of a lifetime of careful decisions that have finally given me the freedom to make a bold one." He nodded slowly. "And Mario? Does he know about this?" "Not yet," I admitted. "The timing needs to be right." What Mario did know was that I had missed our next scheduled call to discuss wedding finances, sending a brief text that I was considering all options and would be in touch soon. This vague response triggered an escalating series of messages from both Mario and Ginger, their tone shifting from expectant to concerned to outright demanding as days passed without my concrete commitment to their financial expectations. "Mom, we need to finalize vendors now," Mario texted one morning. "Ginger is stressed about securing everything in time." And later that same evening from Ginger, "Antonia, I've spoken with my parents and they're willing to cover your portion temporarily if cash flow is an issue, with a repayment plan, of course. The presumption that I would eventually pay, one way or another, was evident in every communication. Neither of them seemed to consider that my hesitation might be a refusal rather than a delay. Meanwhile, the wedding planning continued without me. The group text became a flurry of decisions and arrangements where my input wasn't sought or acknowledged. I learned that the rehearsal dinner menu had been finalized, that the ceremony would include a string quartet playing Bach, and that the color scheme had shifted from blush and gold to champagne and ivory, all without anyone asking for my thoughts. "The florist needs final numbers by Friday," Cole Thompson wrote in the group text. "Antonia, We'll assume you're bringing just yourself unless you indicate otherwise. The systematic exclusion extended beyond planning details. When Mario mentioned that he and Ginger would be meeting with a marriage counselor as required by their officiant, I offered to share some wisdom from my years with James. "Thanks, Mom," came Mario's reply. "But our counselor uses a very specific modern approach. Different generation, different perspectives." The dismissal stung more than I cared to admit. Francis became my sounding board during this tense waiting. Period. Joining me for walks around the neighborhood where I could vent my frustrations without fear of judgment. "Did you see the latest from her father?" I asked during one such walk, showing Francis a text from Cole. "We've arranged for special accommodation rates at the Grand Hotel for out-of-town guests. Standard rooms $450 night, suites $750 night. Let us know your preference, Antonia." Francis snorted in disbelief. "As if you'd need a hotel room in your own town. They're really living in another reality." "A reality where money is the only measure of value," I agreed, pocketing my phone. The sad part is that Mario has fully embraced it. "How much longer until the purchase closes?" Francis asked, changing the subject to what she had taken to calling Operation Venue Takeover. 2 more weeks if everything continues smoothly." The inspection revealed some issues with the heating system, but nothing that affects the deal. "I've already been meeting with the current event manager about retention." Frances linked her arm through mine as we turned back toward my house. "And you're still sure about this? It's not too late to back out." I considered her question seriously, as I had every day since making my decision. "I'm sure. This isn't just about Mario's wedding anymore. It's about reclaiming my own agency, about refusing to be valued solely for my checkbook." What I didn't say aloud was that it was also about teaching my son a lesson he desperately needed to learn, one that I had perhaps failed to instill during his upbringing. The tension reached its peak 3 weeks before the wedding, when I received an official-looking envelope in the mail. Inside was a formal invitation to the marriage of Miss Ginger Elizabeth Thompson to Mr. Mario James Mills, printed on thick cream cardstock with gold foil accents. Handwritten at the bottom in Ginger's precise script was a note. "We hope you've resolved your financial considerations and can join us for our special day. Final catering numbers due in 1 week." The invitation felt less like an inclusion and more like a final notice, a last chance to comply with their expectations before being officially excluded. I placed it on my mantel and stared at it for a long time, processing the complex emotions it triggered. Sadness for what our relationship had become, anger at being so fundamentally misunderstood, and beneath it all, a steely determination to follow through with my plan. That evening, I received a call from Veronica Livingston's attorney. "Ms. Mills, I'm pleased to inform you that all contingencies have been satisfied. We're prepared to close on Willowbrook Estate as early as tomorrow, if that suits your schedule." "Tomorrow would be perfect," I replied, a weight lifting from my shoulders. "And please make sure the current bookings calendar is transferred to me at closing. I understand there are several events already scheduled." "Yes, including a rather large wedding in 3 weeks, the attorney confirmed. "The Thompson Mills ceremony. Quite an extensive contract." "I'm familiar with it," I said, allowing myself a small smile. "In fact, I have some ideas about revising the terms." The day after closing on Willowbrook Estate, I sat in what was now my office. A stately room with floor-to-ceiling bookshelves and a view of the manicured gardens where couples often exchanged their vows. Spread before me on the massive oak desk was the contract for Mario and Ginger's wedding, along with the venue's booking calendar and financial records. Cynthia Parker, the venue's longtime event manager who had agreed to stay on through the transition, sat across from me, her professional demeanor occasionally slipping to reveal curiosity about my unusual situation. "So let me understand correctly," she said, tapping a manicured nail against the wedding contract. "You've purchased this entire property, And you're also the mother of the groom for our largest upcoming event. But the couple doesn't know you're now the owner. That's right, I confirmed, meeting her gaze steadily. And I'd appreciate your discretion until I decide the appropriate time to inform them. Cynthia nodded slowly. Of course. Client confidentiality is part of our standard practice. She hesitated, then added, though I should mention that the final payment for their event is due next week. Typically, I would be contacting them to arrange that. I'll handle that personally, I assured her. In the meantime, I'd like to review the venue policies and any flexibility we might have regarding them. For the next 2 hours, Cynthia walked me through the operational details of Willowbrook, the standard policies, the exceptions occasionally made for premium clients, the vendor relationships that sustained the business. With each new piece of information, my plan became clearer, more defined. The Thompsons have requested several exceptions to our usual rules, Cynthia noted, pulling up their file on her tablet. Extended hours until 2 a.m. instead of our standard midnight cutoff, exclusive use of both the main house and the garden pavilion, and permission to bring in their own alcohol despite our preferred vendor agreement with Riverside Spirits. And these exceptions were granted because Mr. Thompson is quite influential, and frankly, they're paying well above our standard rate, Cynthia admitted. The previous owner was in financial distress and couldn't afford to turn down the premium they offered. I nodded, understanding the dynamics at play. And now that ownership has changed? Cynthia's professional mask slipped slightly, revealing a hint of a smile. That would be entirely at your discretion, Ms. Mills. By the time our meeting concluded, I had a comprehensive understanding of both my rights as the venue owner and the specific expectations the Thompson Mills wedding party had established. I also had the beginnings of a plan that would force my son to confront the consequences of his priorities. That evening, Mario called. I could tell from his tense greeting that this wasn't a social check-in. Mom, we need to finalize things, he said without preamble. The wedding is in 17 days, and we still don't have your financial commitment. Ginger's parents are asking pointed questions. I took a deep breath, centering myself for the conversation I'd been rehearsing in. My mind, I've made my decision, Mario. I'd like to meet with you, just you, not Ginger, to discuss it. Mom, anything you need to say to me can be said to Ginger too. We're a team. This is between mother and son, I insisted, surprising myself with my firmness. Tomorrow noon at Willowbrook Estate? At the venue? Why there? It seems appropriate given the circumstances. I've already arranged it with the management. After a pause, Mario agreed reluctantly. Fine. Noon tomorrow. But Mom, I need to know if you're going to help with the wedding costs. We're running out of time. We'll discuss everything tomorrow, I said, ending the call before he could press further. The next day, I arrived at Willowbrook an hour early, now keenly aware of the property as mine, from the imposing oak doors to the crystal chandeliers that would soon witness my son's marriage. Cynthia had arranged for us to use the small private dining room overlooking the rose garden, setting out coffee service and pastries with the professional touch that had impressed me during our earlier meetings. At precisely noon, Mario arrived, his expression a mixture of impatience and apprehension as he was escorted to the dining room by one of the staff. Mom, he said, giving me a perfunctory hug before taking a seat across from me. This is unexpected. How did you arrange for us to meet here? I have my resources, I replied mildly, pouring him coffee without asking if he wanted any. You look... Well, can we skip the small talk? I've got a meeting with Cole at 2 and Ginger's expecting an update. He glanced at his watch, an expensive timepiece I didn't recognize. Likely a gift from his future father-in-law. Of course, I agreed, folding my hands on the table. I'll get right to the point. I won't be contributing the $52,000 you and Ginger have allocated as my portion of the wedding expenses. Mario's face tightened, a flash of genuine hurt crossing his features before settling into something harder. I see. So you've decided not to be part of my wedding after all? I didn't say that, I corrected him. I said I won't be contributing that specific sum toward the expenses you've outlined. Confusion replaced anger in his expression. I don't understand. Let me clarify, I said, reaching into my portfolio to withdraw a document. This is the current contract between the Thompson Mills wedding party and Willowbrook Estate. How did you get that? That's confidential. It's actually not, at least not from me, I interrupted, sliding another document across the table. Because as of yesterday, I am the owner of Willowbrook Estate. Mario stared at the deed I'd placed before him, incomprehension slowly giving way to shock as he processed my words. You... what? You bought the venue? How is that even possible? Contrary to what you and Ginger seem to believe, I am not financially destitute. I've been investing carefully since before you were born, Mario. The modest lifestyle I maintain is by choice, not necessity. But this place must cost millions, he protested, still struggling to reconcile his perception of me with this new reality. 4.2 million to be exact, I confirmed. Well, within my means when liquidating certain long-term investments. Mario's face cycled through emotions so quickly I could barely track them. Disbelief, confusion, and something that might have been respect before settling on suspicion. Why would you do this? To spite us? To control the wedding? The accusation stung, revealing how thoroughly he had misunderstood my motivations over the years. No, Mario. I did this because when faced with your ultimatum, pay for a wedding I couldn't afford to attend or don't attend at all, I chose a third option. I decided to change the rules of a game I never agreed to play. Mario stared at me. Across the table, coffee forgotten, his face a study in conflicting emotions. I don't understand, he finally said. What does owning the venue have to do with contributing to the wedding costs? I took a sip of my coffee, organizing my thoughts, before responding. The venue is my contribution, Mario. Not in the way you and Ginger expected, but in a way that honors both my role as your mother and my own financial well-being. So you'll let us use it for free? Is that what you're saying? Hope flickered across his features, quickly replaced by calculation as he considered the financial implications. Not exactly, I corrected him, sliding another document across the table. I'm offering to host your wedding under revised terms. The contract modifications are all outlined here. He scanned the document, his expression darkening as he absorbed the changes I'd made. You can't be serious. No alcohol except during the 4-hour reception? Venue closes promptly at 10 p.m.? Guests limited to 100? His voice rose with each new restriction. Ginger will never agree to this. Those are the new venue policies, I explained calmly. I've reviewed the operations and determined that the previous owner's exceptions were financially unsustainable and created unnecessary liability. But these changes completely undermine our vision. The after-party was going to flow until 2 a.m. We have 250 guests confirmed, and Cole has already ordered cases of premium champagne to bring in. Mario ran a hand through his hair in frustration. Mom, you have to make exceptions for your own son's wedding. I've already made an exception, I pointed out. The standard venue fee is being waived entirely, a $30,000 value. All other policies apply equally to all clients. This is ridiculous, he sputtered, standing abruptly. We have a contract. With the previous owner, I reminded him. That contract included a standard change of ownership clause. I'm within my legal rights to modify the terms, provided I give sufficient notice, which I'm doing now, 17 days before the event. Mario paced the small dining room, his tailored suit jacket straining slightly as his shoulders tensed with anger. This is about control, isn't it? You couldn't stand that Ginger and her family were organizing everything, that they have resources you don't, that I'm building a life that doesn't revolve around you. His words landed like physical blows, revealing just how completely he had misunderstood both my actions throughout his life and my current motivations. I forced myself to breathe steadily, to respond to the accusation without matching his anger. No, Mario, this is about respect. About recognizing that relationships, including the one between mother and son, shouldn't be transactional. You gave me an ultimatum that reduced my value to a dollar amount. My presence at your wedding contingent on emptying my retirement accounts. We never said, "You did," I interrupted firmly. Perhaps not in those exact words, but the message was unmistakable. Pay or don't come. I'm simply responding with my own terms. Respect my boundaries or find another venue. Mario stared at me as if seeing a stranger, his breathing heavy with suppressed emotion. Finally, he snatched up the modified contract and thrust it into his messenger bag. I need to discuss this with Ginger and her parents, he said stiffly. You've put us in an impossible position, Mom. I hope you realize that. I understand completely, I replied, maintaining my composure even as my heart ached at the distance between us. Let me know your decision by tomorrow evening. If you choose to find another venue, I'll refund any deposits already paid to the previous owner. As Mario strode out of the dining room, his shoulders rigid with indignation, I remained seated, watching through the window as he crossed the manicured lawn toward the parking area. Only when his car disappeared down the tree-lined drive did I allow myself to feel the full weight of what I'd done, drawn a boundary so firm it might permanently alter our relationship. Cynthia appeared in the doorway, her expression carefully neutral. Would you like me to have housekeeping clear the room, Ms. Mills? Not yet, I said quietly. I need a few more minutes. The fallout from my meeting with Mario was swift and explosive. Within 2 hours, my phone began buzzing with incoming calls. First, from Ginger, then from Cole Thompson, and finally from Harriet. I let each call go to voicemail, recognizing that I needed to process my own emotions before engaging with their inevitable outrage. The messages they left progressed from disbelief to anger to thinly veiled threats, each one more demanding than the last. Antonia, this is completely unacceptable. Ginger's voice was tight with controlled fury. We have guests flying in from Europe. The invitations have been sent. You cannot possibly expect us to revamp everything because of your power. Play. Cole's message was more direct. Ms. Mills, I don't know what game you're playing, but rest assured I have connections with every venue owner in a 100-mile radius. If you think you can force our hand this way, you've severely miscalculated. Harriet surprisingly took a different approach. Antonia, dear, I understand there might be some hurt feelings about the wedding planning. Perhaps we could meet, just us mothers, and work through this? There must be a compromise that preserves Mario and Ginger's special day. I was contemplating these messages when Frances arrived at Willowbrook, responding to my earlier text asking her to meet me. I'd given her a brief update about the confrontation with Mario, but hadn't shared the details of his reaction. So, she said, settling into a chair in what was now my office. How bad was it? About as expected, I admitted, pouring us both tea from the service Cynthia had thoughtfully provided. He accused me of doing this out of spite, of trying to control his wedding. Frances studied my face carefully. Are you having second thoughts? I considered the question honestly before answering. Not about buying the venue or standing my ground, but I am grieving what this reveals about our relationship. The fact that he could believe I'd do this out of petty jealousy rather than self-respect says so much about how he sees me. And the Thompsons? I imagine they're not taking this lying. Down. I gestured toward my phone, which had begun buzzing again with another incoming call. That would be Cole's third attempt in the last hour. I suspect they're strategizing their counteroffensive as we speak. As if summoned by our conversation, Cynthia appeared at the office door. Ms. Mills, I apologize for the interruption, but Cole and Harriet Thompson are in the main lobby, insisting on speaking with you. They don't have an appointment. Frances raised an eyebrow. The siege begins. I took a deep breath. centering myself. Please tell them I'm in a meeting and will be available at 4 p.m. if they'd like to return then. If they prefer, they can schedule a time for tomorrow. After Cynthia left, Francis leaned forward. Are you sure you want to face them alone? I could... Stay, I shook my head. This is a boundary I need to establish myself, but thank you for offering. At precisely 4 p.m., I received word that the Thompsons had returned and were waiting in the main parlor. I took a moment to gather my composure, straightened my simple blazer, and made my way downstairs. Cole Thompson rose when I entered, his imposing height and tailored suit creating the intimidating presence I'm sure had served him well in business negotiations. Harriet remained seated on the antique settee, her blonde hair immaculately styled, diamond tennis bracelet glinting as she nervously adjusted her sleeve. Ms. Mills, Cole began without preamble. I think we all recognize this situation has spiraled into unnecessary complexity. Let's cut to the chase. What will it take for you to honor the original contract terms? The directness was expected. Cole was, after all, a businessman accustomed to solving problems with money. What surprised me was the complete absence of Mario or Ginger. This was now a negotiation between financial powers, with my son nowhere to be seen. Mr. Thompson, Mrs. Thompson. I acknowledged them both with a nod. I appreciate you coming to discuss this personally. However, my terms aren't negotiable. The revised contract represents the conditions under which Willowbrook is available. For the wedding, Cole's jaw tightened, a muscle visibly twitching. Every venue has a price for exceptions. Name yours. This isn't about money, I replied, maintaining steady eye contact. It's about establishing appropriate boundaries. 10,000 above the standard rate, he countered, ignoring my statement. For the extended hours and full guest list. Harriet touched his arm gently, a silent signal, before turning to me with a practiced social smile. Antonia, we understand this must be difficult for you. Perhaps we've been insensitive to your feelings during the planning process. We never intended to exclude you. The attempt at empathy, though clearly strategic, was at least more respectful than Cole's blunt financial approach. Still, it missed the fundamental issue at hand. I appreciate that, Harriet, I said genuinely. But this isn't about hurt feelings. It's about my son telling me that unless I contributed over $50,000 to his wedding, I wouldn't be welcome to attend. That crosses a line no parent should have to accept. The confrontation with the Thompsons ended in a stalemate. They left Willowbrook without a resolution, unconvinced by my explanation and unwilling to accept my terms. Cole's parting words still echoed in my mind days later. You've created this situation, Ms. Mills. Whatever damage this does to your relationship with Mario rests entirely on your shoulders. Perhaps he was right, in a way. I had taken dramatic action that would undoubtedly strain my relationship with my son. But as the initial shock of the confrontation faded, I found myself experiencing an unexpected emotion. Relief. For the first time in decades, I had prioritized my own dignity over my son's demands. I had drawn a clear boundary and held it, despite significant pressure to capitulate. The feeling was both foreign and exhilarating, like discovering muscles I hadn't used in years. In the week that followed, I threw myself into learning the operations of Willowbrook Estate. What had begun as a strategic purchase to address an immediate crisis was evolving into something more. A genuine business interest that engaged parts of my mind long dormant during my years as an educator. Cynthia proved invaluable, patiently, walking me through everything from vendor contracts to seasonal maintenance schedules. During one of our morning meetings, she hesitated before sharing an observation. You know, Ms. Mills, you have a natural instinct for this business. The way you've been analyzing our operational costs and suggesting adjustments, it's impressive. I smiled, surprised by how much the compliment pleased me. Thank you. I suppose decades of managing school budgets and resources provided some transferable skills. It's more than that, she insisted. You see possibilities others miss. Take the library renovation you suggested. creating a dedicated space for intimate ceremonies. That's not just practical, it's visionary. Her words stayed with me, awakening. A realization that my identity extended far beyond Mario's mother, or even retired school principal. I had capacities and interests that had nothing to do with my maternal role, interests I now had the freedom and resources to pursue. One morning, I arrived at Willowbrook to find Frances waiting in the parking area, garden gloves in hand and a determined expression on her face. "The rose garden is a disgrace," she announced without preamble. The previous owner clearly knew nothing about proper pruning techniques. "I've brought my tools." I laughed, genuinely amused by her presumption. "And you're appointing yourself official gardener?" "Think of it as a housewarming gift," she replied, already heading toward the garden. "Besides, what else am I going to do with my retirement? Watch daytime television?" Frances's intervention marked the beginning of a transformation that extended beyond the garden. Over the next few days, I found myself reconnecting with other retired colleagues, discovering that many had skills and interests that could benefit Willowbrook while providing them with purpose and community. Penelope Watkins, former high school art teacher, offered to curate the estate's modest art collection and suggest acquisitions that would enhance the venue's aesthetic. Tony Ramirez, still my financial advisor but now also a friend, introduced me to his wife, Maria, a talented chef, who had ideas for elevating the in-house catering options. Gradually, Willowbrook was becoming more than a venue. It was becoming a second chapter, a community of vibrant retirees sharing their expertise and finding new purpose. Throughout this period of discovery, Mario maintained his silence. The deadline I'd set for his decision about the venue came and went without communication. The group text for wedding planning fell silent. Even Frances, who occasionally spoke with Mario's former high school friends, had no information about his plans. The silence was painful, but also clarifying. Each day that passed without Mario attempting to manipulate or pressure me reinforced that I had been right to establish boundaries. Each morning, I woke with a clearer sense of my own identity beyond motherhood. In my third week as Willowbrook's owner, I decided to convert one of the estate's unused cottages into personal living quarters. The decision wasn't entirely practical. My home in Riverside Heights was perfectly comfortable. But something about establishing a physical presence at the estate felt important, symbolic of this new chapter in my life. As I sorted through decades of accumulated possessions, deciding what to bring to the cottage and what to leave behind, I found myself making choices based solely on my own preferences, rather than considerations of what Mario might need when he visited. There would be no guest room dedicated to him, no space held in anticipation of his potential presence, just rooms that reflected my tastes, my interests, my life. One evening, as Frances helped me arrange books on the cottage's built-in shelves, she paused with a volume of Portuguese poetry in her hands, a gift from my father that I'd kept, but rarely opened over the years. "Are you happy, Tony?" she asked suddenly, studying my face in the warm lamplight. "With all of this, the changes, the distance from Mario, the new direction?" I considered her question seriously, searching my feelings before answering. "I'm discovering what happiness looks like when it's not defined by someone else's needs or approval. It's different than I expected. Quieter, but deeper somehow." She nodded, understanding in her eyes as she handed me the book of poems. "Your father would be proud, you know, not just of what you've accomplished, but of who you're becoming." The silence from Mario stretched into its fourth week when an unexpected text arrived one Tuesday morning. "Mom, can we meet? Just the two of us. Not at Willowbrook." The message was brief, devoid of the emotional manipulation or financial pressure that had characterized our recent interactions. I studied it carefully, trying to discern his intentions before responding simply, "Yes. When and where?" We agreed to meet at Riverside Park, a neutral location we'd both frequented during his childhood, the playground where he'd learned to swing, The baseball diamond where I'd watched countless Little League games from uncomfortable bleachers, rain or shine. It seemed fitting that this conversation would happen in a place layered with shared memories. I arrived early, settling on a bench overlooking the duck pond. The autumn air carried a crisp edge, prompting me to wrap my scarf more tightly around my neck. A few minutes later, I spotted Mario walking along the path, hands thrust deep in his coat pockets, his usual confident stride replaced by something more hesitant. "Hi, Mom," he said, sitting beside me with an awkward half-hug. Up close, I could see signs of strain on his face, slight shadows under his eyes, tension around his mouth. "Hello, Mario," I replied, deliberately keeping my tone neutral. "It's good to see you." For a moment, neither of us spoke, watching a pair of mallards glide across the pond's surface, leaving ripples in their wake. Finally, Mario broke the silence. "Moved the wedding to River Bluff Lodge," he said, staring straight ahead. "It's not Willowbrook, but they had a cancellation for our date, and Cole knows the owner." I nodded, absorbing this information without surprise. "I see. I hope it meets your needs." "It's significantly smaller. We had to cut the guest list almost in half." He glanced at me briefly, then away. "Ginger was upset at first, but she's adjusted. The unspoken question hung between us, whether I would be included in that reduced guest list. But I waited, determined not to fill the uncomfortable silence. "Mom," he finally continued, his voice cracking slightly with an emotion I couldn't immediately identify. "When you bought Willowbrook, was that really about setting boundaries? Or was it about punishing me?" The question revealed so much about his perspective, about the lens through which he viewed our relationship. I took a moment to organize my thoughts, recognizing the importance of clarity in this moment. "It wasn't about punishment, Mario. It was about refusing to participate in a dynamic where my worth was measured solely by what I could financially contribute." I turned to face him directly. "When you told me I wasn't welcome at your wedding, unless I paid for it, you weren't seeing me as your mother, as a person with inherent value in your life. You were seeing me as a resource to be utilized or discarded based on my usefulness." He flinched slightly at my characterization, but didn't deny it. "I didn't think of it that way." "I know," I said softly. "That's part of the problem. You didn't think about how your ultimatum would feel to me because you've grown accustomed to my needs being secondary to yours." Mario was quiet for a long moment, breaking a small twig between his fingers as he seemed to consider my words. "Ginger's parents have been educational these past few weeks. When the Willowbrook situation fell apart, they blamed me for not handling you properly. Cole suggested I should have approached you differently, emphasized the networking opportunities the wedding would create for me, leveraged your desire for my success." The calculated manipulation in Cole's advice sent a chill through me, but I kept my expression neutral. "And what did you think about that suggestion?" "It felt wrong," Mario admitted, surprising me with his candor. "It made me think about all the times you supported me without calculating what you'd get in return. About how you never treated our relationship like a business transaction until—" He stopped abruptly. "Until I bought Willowbrook," I finished. "For him." "But that wasn't a business transaction, Mario. It was a declaration of independence. A statement that I wouldn't be manipulated or excluded from your life based on financial considerations." He nodded slowly, seeming to process this perspective. "I've been thinking a lot about what you said that day at Willowbrook, about respect and boundaries." He looked up, meeting my eyes directly for the first time. "And about how I've taken you for granted." The admission, simple as it was, represented a significant shift. Not an apology, not yet, but an acknowledgement that something in our dynamic needed to change. "So," I said carefully, "what happens now? Would you—" He hesitated, vulnerability evident in his expression. "Would you still come to the wedding? Not because you're paying for anything, but because you're my mother and I want you there?" The invitation, stripped of financial expectations and manipulative pressure, was what I had wanted all along. Simple recognition of my place in his life based on our relationship rather than my wallet. And yet, I hesitated, recognizing that acceptance without clarity might simply reset our dysfunctional patterns. "I'd like to be there," I said truthfully, "but only if we both understand that our relationship is changing. I won't return to the old dynamic, Mario. I can't." The wedding at River Bluff Lodge was indeed smaller than the extravaganza originally planned for Willowbrook Estate. 100 guests instead of 250, a 6-piece band rather than a full orchestra, dinner served at Elegantly. Arranged tables instead of the elaborate serving stations Ginger had initially envisioned. Yet as I sat watching my son exchange vows with the woman he loved, I found the intimacy of the scaled-back celebration lent it an authenticity that might have been lost in the grandeur of their original plans. Mario's voice carried clearly through the lodge's rustic hall as he promised to cherish Ginger, his expression more genuinely emotional than I'd seen in years. I wore a simple blue dress I'd selected myself, without input from the wedding planner or concerns about photographing well for social media. The mother of the groom corsage Mario had personally delivered to my home the morning of the wedding rested against my wrist, a peace offering of sorts, a small acknowledgement of my role in his life. Cole and Harriet Thompson maintained a polite distance during the ceremony and reception, their earlier animosity replaced by cool civility. They had lost this particular battle of wills, and while they hadn't surrendered graciously, they had at least recognized the futility of continued hostility. Ginger surprised me during the reception by seeking me out, champagne flute in hand. "The flowers are beautiful," she said, gesturing toward the simple but elegant arrangements that had replaced her original vision of imported blooms. "Your friend Frances has quite a talent." "Yes, she does," I agreed, touched that she'd noticed. Frances's contribution. The garden at Willowbrook now flourished under my friend's expert care, providing fresh flowers for events at a fraction of the cost of commercial florists, one of many operational improvements we'd implemented. "Mario told me about your conversation in the park," Ginger continued, her tone more genuine than I'd ever heard from her, "about boundaries and respect." She glanced toward where Mario stood chatting with college friends, his posture more relaxed than it had been in Harriet and Cole's presence. "I think it was good for him. For us, actually." The admission was unexpected, offering a glimpse of a young woman who might be capable of more self-awareness than I'd given her credit for. "Change is rarely comfortable," I said carefully, "but often necessary." She nodded, something like respect, flickering in her eyes before she was called away by a bridesmaid. Later, during the traditional mother-son dance, an element Mario had specifically requested be included despite the reduced festivities, my son held me with a gentle reverence that reminded me of the boy he'd once been. "Thank you for coming, Mom," he said quietly as we moved across the floor. "And for everything else, not just the dance lessons that are keeping me from embarrassing myself right now, but for the years of showing up even when I didn't appreciate it." "You're welcome," I replied simply, choosing to accept the implicit apology rather than dwelling on past hurts. "All I ever wanted was for you to be happy, Mario. Truly happy, not just successful by someone else's measure." "I'm learning the difference," he admitted. "Slowly, but I'm learning." As the music ended and we separated, I realized the profound gift his acknowledgement represented. Not a return to our former dynamic, but the possibility of something new, something healthier, something based on mutual respect rather than expectation and obligation. 6 months after the wedding, Willowbrook Estate was flourishing under my direction, with a calendar full of bookings and a growing reputation for intimate, meaningful celebrations rather than ostentatious displays. The cottage had become my primary residence, filled with books and art that reflected my rediscovered interests. Mario and Ginger visited occasionally, their relationship with me evolving into something that, while still complicated, was increasingly authentic. They had declined Cole's offer of a condo in his newest development, choosing instead a modest house they could afford on their own, a decision that suggested lessons had been learned beyond our immediate conflict. "You know," Francis remarked, one evening as we sat on my cottage porch watching the sunset paint Willowbrook's grounds in golden light, "when you first told me about buying this place, I thought you might be making an expensive mistake." "But it wasn't about the venue at all, was it?" I smiled, understanding what she meant. "No, it wasn't. It was about reclaiming myself, my value beyond what I could give or do for others, about remembering that Antonia exists independently of Mario's mom." "And was it worth it?" she asked, though her tone suggested she already knew the answer. I looked out over the estate, at the gardens now blooming with plants I'd chosen, at the pathways I walked each morning with purpose and pleasure, at the business I was building, not out of obligation, but genuine interest. I thought of my relationship with Mario, now tentatively rebuilding on a foundation of mutual respect rather than one-sided sacrifice. "More than worth it," I confirmed. "Some lessons cost more than others. This one cost $4 million and decades of accumulated expectations. But learning that my worth isn't measured by what I give to others, that was priceless." Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.